Now the Supreme Court has clarified and said that the armed forces can act against officers in cases of adultery. You'd remember there was a constitution bench of the Supreme Court that has given a verdict that adultery is no more a criminal offence under the statute books. However, a special provision has been created, or a special go-by has been given, so that Army can act under its special rules. The SC Constitution Bench has given a clarification to its 2018 judgment that struck down the adultery provision under the IPC. The top court has clarified that the Army Act that stipulates court-martial for officers for such unbecoming acts. Now, there was already an Armed Forces Tribunal that had said something to this effect, and now there is a endorsement coming in from the Supreme Court. Ananya with us on the broadcast. Ananya, tell us more about this.
Well, the Supreme Court in 2018 had decriminalized adultery under the Indian Penal Code, and in fact, it had only been left as a ground of divorce, if you remember. But now today, the Supreme Court Constitution Bench has, in fact, clarified and it said that the armed forces can actually go on and, in fact, prosecute their officers. They can proceed on with under the Army Act against their officers for this unbecoming conduct, if you remember, because, in fact, in the Army Act or in the Armed Forces Act, basically, this is considered as an unbecoming act, and after the adultery had been struck down by the Supreme Court in 2018, it was a lacuna in law as to whether or not the armed forces can actually proceed on in this particular case. But then today, the Supreme Court has filled this lacuna in law, and it's clearly stated that that the armed forces can actually proceed on and prosecute their officers under the Army Act with regards to this unbecoming act. Now, the grounds that were taken by, in fact, the Army in order to say that this should be done and it should be an unbecoming act is that this act can actually lead to mutiny in the forces, and this was actually argued by, in fact, the ASG was appearing for the Ministry of Defense and the armed forces here. And it's clearly, after noting all of these arguments, the Supreme Court has said that the armed forces can actually proceed on and court-martial their officers. They can proceed on under the Armed Forces Act against their officers if an act of adultery is found out. And in fact, it's also been clarified that it's a gender-neutral direction that has been given. So if a man does it or if a woman does it, doesn't matter. But then the Army or the Navy or the Air Force can actually proceed on.
I think the last point that Ananya made is the most important one, that while what adultery survived on the statute books was a provision that had clear gender biases. But in this case, what the Supreme Court has clarified is that adultery can be used as a ground for the Armed Forces Tribunal or the special proceedings of a court-martial, if at all to be conducted, for men and women officers both. So the armed forces have been given a special go-by as far as that particular provision of the Constitution is concerned. Moving